May I request the director to greet Mr. Subramanian with the shawl? May I request Sri Krishna Kulkarni, Chairman Board of Governors, to hand over the Distinguished Alumnus Award and the citation scroll to Dr. Subramaniam. May I request Professor Nandita Roy to come on stage and read the citation for Dr. Subramaniam.
Good evening. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We take immense pleasure in honoring Dr. K.V. Subramanian, an eminent scholar and an alumnus of the 34th batch of IIM Calcutta, for taking a path less trodden and significantly promoting India's interests in the economic spheres by bringing transparency and accountability to the domain. Dr. K.V. Subramanian, currently the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, is a leading expert on economic policy, banking, and corporate governance. A PhD from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business and a top ranking IIT-IIM alumnus, Dr. Subramanian's seminal public policy contributions have manifested amidst the once in a century crisis caused by the COVID 19 pandemic. Apart from predicting the V shaped economic recovery in September 2020, when every economic commentator, both at home and abroad, foretold impending economic doom, Dr. Subramanian has brought his reformist zeal to the fore by introducing a slew of second generation reforms that will generate inclusive growth for the economy in the coming decades. These reforms are aimed at enabling competition in the markets for factors of production, enhancing the share of the manufacturing sector in the economy and thereby creating jobs for our youth, building cutting edge physical and digital infrastructure, and addressing the severe supply side frictions engendered by decades of license permit Raj. Dr. Subramanian persuasively made the case for these reforms in three economic surveys that he has authored. The path-breaking 2019-20 survey commended ethical wealth creation for a prosperous India. By integrating India's rich economic and spiritual heritage with modern economics, he advocated a marriage of the invisible hand of the market with the hand of ethics, that is, a marriage of artha and dharma. The 2020-21 survey advocated counter-cyclical fiscal policy focused on capital expenditures, while the 2018-19 survey laid the strategic blueprint of a virtuous cycle for India to become a $5 trillion economy. Dr. Subramanian has brought several out of the box ideas to the Indian economy. India was the only country to implement supply side measures to tackle the pandemic by identifying early that the pandemic will lead to severe supply side disruptions. The contrast to supply shortages and inflation being witnessed globally and the runaway inflation in India post the global financial crisis bear testimony to the sharp analysis and courage of conviction to differ from the herd. India's prudent fiscal spending that leveraged the financial sector to direct scarce fiscal resources better stems from Dr. Subramanian's deep understanding of the salutary role that the financial sector can play in directing fiscal transfers to the genuinely distressed. His welfare oriented ideas include utilizing the behavioral economics of nudge, Thalinomics, and the bare necessities index. Acknowledging Dr. Subramanian's contributions, the Honorable Prime Minister tweeted his delight in working with him and noted his, I quote, academic brilliance, unique perspectives on economic and policy matters, and reformatory zeal. Dr. Subramanian has been conferred the Distinguished Alumnus Award by his alma mater, IIT Kanpur. Apart from being the youngest chief economic advisor, Subramanian is among the youngest to receive this honor. As a professor of finance at the Indian School of Business, his research has been published in the world's leading journals. As the first ever in his entire clan to step into the hallowed portals of a university, Dr. Subramanian has been privileged to live the Indian dream by getting the ultimate honor to serve the nation. We acknowledge Dr. Subramanian's significant contributions as a successful economic policy professional and diplomat with enormous pride and bestow upon him the Institute's highest honor for its alumni, the Distinguished Alumnus Award, given this 14th day of November 2021. Thank you.
Respected Chairman, Board of Governors, Kulkarni ji, respected Chief Guest, respected Director, Professor Sarkar, respected Deans, fellow students, fellow alumni, faculty, family, and friends that have gathered. Let me first start out by expressing my enormous gratitude to this institution for not only providing me such a wonderful education, but then bringing that to such a wonderful circle by bestowing on me this award as well. I genuinely feel very, very grateful. The dominant emotion that I feel is wonderfully expressed by none other than Tyagaraja in one of the songs that he sang, which actually is really famous in Carnatic music, which goes as Endaru Mahanubhavalu Andariki Na Vandanamalu. In Telugu, I'm going to translate it. It means there are so many great people. I bow down to each one of them in humility, because honestly, there are so many great people. Among them, to get an opportunity to be here receiving this award, just one feels extremely humbled, and that is the dominant sentiment I feel. There's one aspect that I want to share. This institute taught me to think from first principles. I think an aspect that never ever goes out of fashion. When one says thinking from first principles, it is effectively thinking ab initio. This is the place where I actually got the opportunity to transform myself from an engineer who happened to just go into engineering without necessarily knowing whether that was his passion, to the field of business and economics, which I eventually discovered, and research in that is my passion. So that transformation started from this institute, and therefore that mountain of gratitude for this institute to have actually enabled me to find my passion is something that I will never be able to repay. I'll give you just one example of this thinking from first principles. As we all acknowledge, what we have been living through over the last 1.5 years is a once-in-a-century pandemic. And in economics, I think there is nothing more fundamental or more first principles than just supply and demand. Something that I learned at this institute, but came very, very useful during, when thinking about the policy during the pandemic. I'm just going to illustrate more as what I learned and what we all can hope to actually take forward from an esteemed institution like this. I think when one takes a first class here in economics, one is taught that if you just increase demand, keeping supply unchanged, what happens is quantity increases, but price goes up as well. Translated into macroeconomics, what that means is that yes, you do get a shift on growth. So if fiscal policy increases demand, you obviously do get an impact on growth. But what also happens is that there is inflation. And real world policy oftentimes happens in a dynamic sense. It doesn't happen in a static fashion. Now, when you have a situation where inflation goes up, fiscal policy has increased demand, let's say policy has not done anything to increase supply, then monetary policy has to actually try and unwind that increase in demand that fiscal policy has done, because the mandate for monetary policy is inflation and keeping inflation under control. As a result, what you get is a situation where fiscal policy increased demand, monetary policy unwinds that. So whatever growth you got, in a short period, that's, you're back to square one. And so fiscal policy and monetary policy end up working at cross purposes. In contrast, something as basic as the fact that, and something that one learned here, at IIM Calcutta, if you increase supply and you increase demand, then you get a much bigger kick, you get a much bigger increase in quantity, but price remains the same, does not go up. Translated again into macroeconomic terms, what that means is you get a much higher impact on growth, and you have inflation under control. When inflation is in control, monetary policy does not have to unwind that increase in demand that fiscal policy did. As a result, monetary policy and fiscal policy can work in tandem, not at cross purposes. I think, what you're seeing in the globe now, with US experiencing historical inflation, 30-year high, is actually illustration of this textbook phenomena that one learned here. The fact that if you look India vis-a-vis the global financial crisis, India during the COVID years versus other economies, India has been the only country that has actually taken supply side measures. All the other countries have only done demand side measures, and that is why you actually, seeing commodity prices go up, shipment containers not being available for exports, inflation at a historical high. Just simple illustration of the fact that if you just increase demand without increasing supply, that is exactly what you would get. In contrast, in India, inflation has been benign. And just to contrast with the global financial crisis as well, when we only increased demand, we had double-digit inflation despite no lockdowns, despite no night curfews, for 18 months, every month consecutively, and many other macro aspects as well, to the extent that India became part of the fragile five. In contrast, now India has actually a very comfortable situation on inflation, 4.5% recently, a fiscal deficit that is actually lower than peer economies, and a current account surplus this year. So very strong fundamentals, macro fundamentals, and that I think I would owe that to the learnings that one had from something as basic as supply and demand, and the ability to think from first principles that I really got to learn at this wonderful institute, IIM Calcutta. It's been an indeed genuine privilege to be here, to be in this institute, to learn from peers and learn from some wonderful faculty. And I think it's a privilege to actually have some of the faculty who have taught me, Professor Anup Sinha, Professor Saibal Chittapadhyay, and actually they're sitting here in the audience. To have faculty who have taught you here, is, I think, just warms my heart enormously. Thank you very much. With enormous gratitude, I thank you all for actually providing me this opportunity. Thank you.